My name is Claire Hudson, and at 36 years old, my mother erased me from the future of our family business in front of 52 employees. She stood on a stage decorated with gold balloons, raised a champagne glass, and announced that her son would inherit everything she had spent 32 years building. Then she looked directly at me and said something that made the entire room laugh. I smiled, I applauded, I even raised my glass. Because by that point, I already knew a secret that would change every life in that room before the weekend was over. My mother thought she was giving away her company. The problem was it hadn't legally belonged to her for almost 5 years, and the only person who knew that was sitting quietly in the back of the room, holding a sealed envelope. Welcome back to Hidden Family Revenge, where the quietest person in the room is usually the one holding the truth. If you've ever watched someone take credit for your work while treating you like you were invisible, this story is going to hit harder than you expect. Because sometimes the person who saves everything is the last person anyone thanks. And sometimes the paperwork remembers what people conveniently forget. The morning of my mother's retirement party started with a phone call I almost ignored. It was 6:30. Rain tapped against my apartment windows. I was halfway through my first cup of coffee when my phone lit up. Ethan Hudson, my brother. The golden child, the future king of every kingdom our family ever imagined. I stared at the screen for 3 rings before answering. Claire? No hello, no good morning, just my name. That was Ethan. He only called when he needed something. What is it? I need a favor. Of course he did. I leaned back in my chair. What kind of favor? The bank needs updated financials before Mom's announcement tonight. I smiled, because Ethan had worked at Hudson Manufacturing for 12 years. He was vice president, supposedly, and yet somehow he still couldn't read a balance sheet without developing a migraine. Then send them the financials. A pause. Then, I don't know where they are. I closed my eyes. 36 years old, vice president, future CEO, couldn't find the financial statements. That sentence summarized my entire family. Hudson Manufacturing wasn't glamorous. We made industrial components for shipping companies, metal parts, machine assemblies, custom fabrication. The kind of business nobody notices until something breaks. My grandfather started it in a rented warehouse in 1979. My mother inherited it in the late 90s, and according to every family story ever told, Ethan was destined to inherit it next. Not because he was the best choice, because he was the son. The future had been decided before either of us learned multiplication. Growing up, there were 2 sets of rules. Ethan's mistakes were adventures. My mistakes were character flaws. If Ethan got a C in school, he was trying his best. If I got an A-, my mother wanted to know what happened. When Ethan crashed a company truck at 19, everyone laughed. When I forgot a client file at 23, I heard about it for 3 years. By 30, I stopped competing. You can't win a game where the scorekeeper owns the scoreboard. The funny thing is, I actually loved the business. Not the politics, not the family, the business itself. The numbers, the logistics, the contracts, the strategy. I loved watching a company grow. I loved solving problems. I loved turning chaos into structure. While Ethan learned how to give speeches, I learned how to read financial reports. While Ethan networked at golf courses, I learned how to negotiate supplier contracts. And while everyone talked about him becoming CEO one day, I quietly became the person keeping the company alive. Nobody noticed. At least, that's what they thought. Around noon, I drove to headquarters. Hudson Manufacturing sat on 12 acres outside Hartford. 3 buildings, 2 warehouses, 1 administrative office. Nothing impressive from the outside. Everything important happened inside. As soon as I entered the parking lot, I saw preparations for the retirement party. White tents, catering trucks, rental furniture, floral displays. Enough decorations to host a small wedding. My mother never did anything halfway, especially when the event was about her. Inside the office, employees were rushing around preparing for the evening. Most of them smiled when they saw me. Some hugged me, a few stopped me to ask questions. Not because I was management, because I solved problems. People remember who helps them when things go wrong. That's a different kind of authority, one that doesn't come with a title. As I walked toward my office, I heard laughter coming from the executive conference room. The door was partially open. My mother was inside. So was Ethan, and so was Linda Reeves, the company's chief financial officer. Linda had worked there almost 20 years. Smart, careful, dangerously observant, the kind of person who remembered everything. I wasn't trying to listen, but then I heard my name, so I stopped.
"Claire needs to learn to let go eventually," my mother said. Someone chuckled. Probably Ethan. "She's going to have a hard time tonight." My brother laughed. "She'll survive." Then my mother said something that made me freeze. "Honestly, she's always acted like the company belongs to her." The room laughed, and for a second I just stood there. Because some lies are so outrageous they're almost impressive. I continued walking, not because it didn't hurt, because I was tired of being surprised by it. At some point, disappointment becomes routine. You stop expecting better. You start expecting consistency. And my family was consistently themselves. The party began at 6. By 7, the place was packed. Employees, retired workers, suppliers, family friends, former executives. 52 people, maybe more. Everyone there to celebrate my mother's retirement. And everyone there expecting Ethan Hudson to become the next CEO. The speeches started around 8. Several managers spoke. A few longtime employees shared stories. People laughed, people cried. My mother smiled through all of it. Then she walked onto the stage, and everything changed. She looked incredible, confident, commanding, the kind of woman who could walk into a room and immediately own it. That had always been her gift, even when she was wrong, especially when she was wrong. She thanked the employees, thanked the customers, thanked the community. Then she moved to the part she'd been waiting for all night. The future, the succession plan, the legacy, the kingdom. She raised her glass. The room quieted. And she smiled toward Ethan. "My son has spent 12 years preparing for this moment." Applause. "Ethan understands this company." More applause. "Ethan understands leadership." Even more applause. I noticed Linda Reeves staring at the floor. That was interesting. Then my mother turned toward me and smiled, the way people smile before delivering a punchline. Claire helped too, of course. Laughter. Light, friendly, just enough. Then came the line, the one I still remember perfectly. "Every family business needs one child who dreams and one child who actually stays." The room laughed. harder this time, because everyone understood exactly who she meant. I felt 50 pairs of eyes turn toward me, waiting, watching, measuring my reaction. I smiled, raised my glass, and applauded, just like everyone else. My mother continued, "Tonight, I'm proud to announce that effective immediately, Ethan Hudson will become President and CEO of Hudson Manufacturing." The room erupted. Applause, cheers, celebration. My brother stood, shook hands, accepted congratulations, and acted exactly like a man inheriting something he'd earned. But across the room, Linda Reeves wasn't clapping. Neither was one elderly man sitting quietly near the back wall. Most people didn't recognize him. I did. Arthur Kane, retired auditor, 72 years old, semi-retired, brilliant, dangerous, and carrying a manila envelope on his lap. The moment I saw that envelope, I knew. He'd brought it. After all these years, he'd actually brought it. Because 5 years earlier, when Hudson Manufacturing stood 27 days from bankruptcy, when creditors were preparing lawsuits, when payroll almost failed, when suppliers threatened legal action, there had been exactly 3 people in the room: me, Arthur Kane, and one banker. The 3 people who knew what really happened. Nobody else knew. Not Ethan, not my mother, not the employees. Nobody. Because some rescues happen quietly, and some ownership transfers happen even quieter. Across the ballroom, Arthur looked at me, just once. Then he touched the envelope. A tiny movement, barely noticeable, but enough. The signal was clear. The truth had finally arrived. And before the night was over, everyone was going to learn who actually owned Hudson Manufacturing. The silence after my grandfather spoke felt heavier than the storm outside. Nobody moved, nobody blinked, and for the first time in my life, the most powerful man in my family looked nervous. My father stared at the envelope lying on the dining room table, the envelope he had laughed at, the envelope he had called worthless, the envelope my grandfather had protected for 13 years. Finally, my Uncle Darren broke the silence. "What trust?" Grandfather folded his hands. "The Harrison Family Preservation Trust." The room erupted. "What trust? Since when? How much money?" My father looked like he couldn't decide whether to yell or faint. Grandfather didn't raise his voice. "The trust was established after your grandmother died." His eyes moved toward me. "It was created to protect the family property from irresponsible decisions." My father's face turned crimson. "Are you calling me irresponsible?" Grandfather ignored him. "The trust owns the lake property, the farmland, the investment accounts, and the commercial buildings." Every word landed like a hammer. Then came the number. "The current value is approximately $18.7 million. Aunt Rebecca nearly dropped her wine glass. My cousin gasped. My mother sat down suddenly, and my father looked like the floor had disappeared beneath him. But the real bomb hadn't even exploded yet. Grandfather picked up another document. "The trust also names a successor trustee." My father actually smiled. I watched hope return to his face. Of course, he assumed it would be him. He was the son, the favorite, the chosen one, the future king of Harrison Land. Grandfather looked directly at him, then said, "It isn't you." The smile vanished instantly. The room froze again. My father laughed nervously. "Okay, enough jokes." No joke. Grandfather slid the document across the table. "The successor trustee is Emma." Every head turned toward me. I honestly couldn't breathe. "What?" I whispered.
My father exploded. Absolutely not. He slammed both hands onto the table. She's 34. Grandfather nodded. Correct. She doesn't know anything about running family assets. Grandfather smiled. Actually, she knows more than anyone in this room. Then he reached into his pocket and pulled out something none of us expected. A small digital recorder. My father frowned. What is that? Grandfather's eyes hardened. The reason we're having this conversation tonight. My stomach dropped, because suddenly I realized he wasn't finished, not even close. 3 months earlier, Grandfather hired someone. Not an investigator, not a lawyer, a witness. Someone he trusted completely. Someone nobody in the family paid attention to. Mr. Leonard, the quiet caretaker who maintained the lake property, the man everyone ignored, the man my father treated like furniture. For 3 months, Leonard documented everything, every meeting, every conversation, every plan, every attempt by my father to change the estate. The room went silent as Grandfather pressed play, and then my father's voice filled the dining room, loud, clear, impossible to deny. Once Dad signs, we sell the North acreage immediately. My Uncle Darren's eyes widened. The recording continued. We can easily get $6 million for that section alone. My cousin looked sick. Then another recording. And Emma doesn't need to know anything until it's finalized. Another. The old man won't live another year anyway. A gasp exploded across the room. My mother's hand flew to her mouth. My father looked like he'd been struck by lightning. But the recordings kept coming, each one worse than the last, each one proving exactly what Grandfather had feared, each one destroying decades of carefully crafted family mythology. And then came the final recording, the one that ended everything. My father's voice, laughing. If Emma thinks she's family, she's delusional. She's useful, that's all. The room became completely silent. Not awkward silent, funeral silent. Nobody looked at my father anymore, because suddenly everyone saw him. The real version, not the version he'd spent 40 years performing, the actual man underneath. And that was the moment the power shifted, forever. The birthday party ended 20 minutes later, not with cake, not with presents, not with speeches. People simply left, one by one. My aunt, my cousins, family friends, neighbors. Nobody wanted to stay. Nobody wanted to defend him. Nobody even wanted to talk. The truth had sucked all the oxygen out of the room. By 10:30, only 5 people remained. Grandfather, my mother, my father, my Uncle Darren.
Uncle Darren. And me. My father sat alone at the table. Nobody beside him. Nobody supporting him. Nobody rescuing him. For perhaps the first time in his entire life. Grandfather stood slowly, then placed one final document in front of him. "What is this?" my father asked. His voice sounded smaller now, older, defeated. Grandfather answered calmly, "Your removal." My father blinked. "What?" "Effective immediately." The document removed him from every management position connected to the family properties, every board, every partnership, every authority role. Gone. One signature, one page, one consequence. My father stared at the paper, then at Grandfather, then at me. And for the first time all evening, he looked afraid. The next morning changed everything. News travels fast in wealthy families, faster than social media, faster than gossip.
Within 48 hours, every relative knew. Within a week, every family friend knew. Within 2 weeks, every business partner knew. The image my father had spent decades building collapsed like wet cardboard. People stopped calling. Investors became cautious. Opportunities disappeared. Not because anyone punished him, because trust disappeared. And once trust leaves, everything follows. 6 months later, something happened that nobody expected. My father called me. Not for money, not for help, not to argue. He simply asked if we could meet. I almost said no. Part of me wanted to, but curiosity won. We met at a small coffee shop. He looked older, much older, like someone had removed a mask he'd worn too long. For several minutes he said nothing. Then, finally, I was wrong. I waited. He swallowed. I spent years treating you like competition. Silence. Then, you were the only person trying to protect this family. More silence. Finally, he looked at me. Real emotion in his eyes. No performance, no audience, no manipulation. Just regret. I'm sorry. 3 words. Words I'd waited most of my life to hear. The strange thing, they didn't feel victorious. They felt sad, because by then I no longer needed them. I wasn't the little girl still trying to earn approval. I wasn't the daughter begging to be chosen. I was simply Emma, and that was enough. 1 year later, grandfather turned 82. We celebrated at the lake house. The same house, the same property, the same family. But everything felt different. Healthier. Cleaner. Honest. Grandfather sat on the porch watching the sunset. I sat beside him. After a while, he smiled. You know why I chose you? I looked over. Because Dad failed the test? He laughed. No. Then he pointed toward the lake. Because you never wanted the power.
I thought about that and realized he was right. The people most desperate to control everything are usually the last people who should. The people who deserve responsibility are often the ones willing to walk away from it. The trust remained intact. The property stayed protected. The family survived. And my father? He spent the next several years rebuilding relationships instead of chasing control. Slowly, imperfectly, but genuinely. Sometimes justice isn't destroying someone. Sometimes justice is forcing them to finally see themselves. That birthday party wasn't the night my father lost everything. It was the night he lost the illusion that everything already belonged to him. And the moment that illusion died, our family finally had a chance to become real.